This is a Rattle and Hum Sports Podcast for Saturday, July the 27th, 2013. I'm Bryan Houston, and we are covering Dallas Cowboys training camp with Matthew Postins for Rattle and Hum Sports. How you doing, Matthew?
Hey, fine, Bryan. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Before we start on what we're going to call maybe a stock watch and decide whether we want to buy or sell some of these guys, why don't you give us the latest on what's going on at training camp? It looks like we got more injuries to deal with.
Yeah, a couple more from Friday's workout. Ben Bass, the defensive end, who seems to have really benefited from the injuries to Anthony Spencer and Tyrone Crawford, came up with an ankle injury toward the end of workout. It's not clear how severe that is. The safety, Matt Johnson, the second-year guy that the Cowboys are hoping will grow into a starter this season, hurt his knee during pass coverage. He did come back to practice, so chances are his injury situation isn't that severe. Nate Livings came back to workouts yesterday, coming off the PUP. He actually worked with the first-team offense, did some work with the third-team offense at guard as well. Miles Austin and Jason Hatcher had the day off, and then, of course, there's the bevy of injuries that are left over from the past few days. Nothing really new there. None of those guys coming back until at least next week. Guys like Jay Ratliff, Ronald Leary, Mackenzie Bernardo, Danny Cole, James Hanna, Anthony Spencer, and the like.
That's a pretty good list.
Yeah, it is a good list of nice starters and backups and guys you don't want to see on the injured list this early in training camp.
And the list just grows. That's the sad thing about it. So, Okay, you have something that you've created called the Cowboy Stock Watch. After week one of training camp, you want to take a look at some of the guys that their stock is going up, and then maybe some that are going down. And when you say stock going down, are you talking about guys that literally could be fighting for roster spots, or just the... You kind of explain the criteria here.
Well, roster spot is certainly part of it. You're looking at guys that have either really helped themselves or really hurt themselves the first week of camp, whether by their performance or simply by their absence at this point. And it's to varying degrees. You know, in some cases it's about a roster spot, and in some cases it's about whether or not you're going to be a starter or not. So that's kind of where we're coming from with the stock watch. You know, which players have really helped themselves, which players have really hurt themselves the first week of camp. Okay,
let's take the guys who have helped themselves first of all. You've given me a list, so I'm going to let you just kind of take them name by name. Let's start. It's really nice to see that the stock is going up for a couple of offensive linemen because they certainly need them. Kevin Kowalski, first of all.
Yeah, Kowalski's a guard center that, frankly, I didn't really give much of a chance of making the team right now. But after a week, you look at the offensive linemen, you look at the guys that are hurt. Obviously, Livings is back, but Ronald Leary and Mackenzie Bernardo are still hurt. They're both guards. That has given Kowalski an opportunity to really get himself in front of the coaching staff during first-team workouts the past several days, and the Cowboys really like what they've seen. Kowalski was a guy who came in the middle of that San Francisco game a couple of years ago and gave them some nice play in that overtime win over the 49ers. But, you know, with everything that they've been doing at guard and with the interior of the offensive line, I really did not see Kowalski as a player to make the team coming out of Oxnard. Now he's made himself a factor by the way he's played. He's really picked up the scheme. They're implementing more of a zone blocking scheme this year, which is easier to pick up and easier to implement and easier to execute. And I think that has helped Kowalski along the way as well. I don't know if he makes the team necessarily as far as the final cuts go, but he has certainly put himself in a position where he can compete with Leary and David Arkin and some of the other guys that are competing for those two backup guard positions.
All right, here's another name that just absolutely blows my mind. I mean, I guess it makes perfect sense that the stock would go up on Doug Free after he takes a massive pay cut.
Well, the money really doesn't have as much to do with this as the fact that he's actually played well the first week of camp. The Cowboys have been highly laudatory of the way that he has played over the past 7 days, the way he's practiced. The thing that I keep hearing is that his technique is better than it was a year ago. And you can take that for what it's worth. Technique means a lot of different things at the tackle position, but they're really happy with the way that he's executing at the position. And the competition that we expected at this position really hasn't come to pass, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But even with the injury to Jeremy Parnell, Free has pretty much been working at the first team right tackle position since the start of camp. And everything that I've heard and read from both the Cowboys and observers that are at camp says that Free seems to have bounced back from the malaise that he was in last year.
Well, it's amazing what poverty and the idea of being out of the league will do for you.
Well, poverty being $3.5 million a year, I suppose that's the case.
Yeah, but the out of the league part was a very real possibility if he didn't do better this year.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
All right, obviously with the change over to the 4-3, the Monty Kiffin Tampa 2, the emphasis on needing safeties that can perform, you've got J.J. Wilcox's name on this list.
Yeah, this is the rookie that the Cowboys drafted, a guy that I think some people kind of looked at as a project because he'd only played a year of safety at Georgia Southern. But he's come into the first week of camp, and he's developed a reputation as a big hitter, which is something you like to have in the cover 2 defense at that strong safety position. Wilcox took Philip Tanner's head off the other day in workouts, and Jason Garrett actually talked about it at length that day, saying that, we told him to stop doing that, but told him to not stop doing that, if you know what I mean. When you're a rookie, when you're a young player, part of developing your reputation is getting yourself in front of coaches and making those kinds of hits in practice. And there's been a real de-emphasis in the NFL in the last few years on contact during workouts. But when Wilcox has had the opportunity to hit somebody, he's taken full advantage of it, to the point where Garrett actually invoked the name Bill Bates in talking about J.J. Wilcox the other day. So for a Cowboys fan of a certain age, you know what that means.
I like the sound of that. Mm-hmm. The other safety whose stock is going up, according to your list, is Will Allen.
Yeah, this is a guy, he's 10 years in the league. In fact, there are only 2 or 3 players on this team that have played in the NFL longer than Will Allen. And, coming out of minicamp and OTAs, the Cowboys were really, really high on Matt Johnson, to the point where he was actually on their first team at strong safety on the depth chart ahead of Will Allen. Well, this week Will Allen has kind of entrenched himself in a way in which he's basically said, if you're going to be the starter, you're going to have to go through me to do it, because he's played extremely well in camp. He's getting a lot of praise from Jason Garrett and from Monty Kiffin. And the thing is, of all the players in this team, he is probably the most knowledgeable about the cover 2 because he played in it in Tampa under Monty Kiffin. That's part of the reason why he's here. And, one report that I read said that he looks a lot more spry than they expected him to be coming into this season, because he's had some injuries and he has some mileage in the tires, obviously. But, they need a veteran presence at that position because Barry Church is still on the young side. You've got guys like Wilcox and Skandrick, and Allen certainly fits that bill. It's going to be very interesting to see how that competition plays out with Matt Johnson, but Allen has certainly helped himself out this week.
And it's always extremely encouraging to see a defensive tackle with the stock going up when you know how badly the Cowboys need defensive linemen. Nick Hayden is a guy you list.
Yeah, and part of this is the fact that the Cowboys are without Jay Ratliff right now, and that's giving guys behind him an opportunity to really show themselves. Obviously, the Cowboys know what they have in Sean Lissamore, and he's kind of the primary backup behind both Ratliff and Jason Hatcher inside. But they didn't know a lot about Nick Hayden coming into camp because he's really only been with the Cowboys for a couple of months. Guy out of Wisconsin, so he's big. He likes to hit people. That's the way they are at Wisconsin. He's been in the league for several years, but he's really just kind of bounced around between Carolina and Cincinnati, and now that he's in Dallas, he's really showing that he is a good fit for the system. He's not necessarily an explosive player. He's not necessarily a very quick player, but he's proven to be a good fit for the system, specifically in that position where Jason Hatcher is right now, the one technique, which is more responsible for defending the run than defending the pass or rushing the passer. You like that guy to be in that 300-pound range, and that's really where Nick Hayden is right now. And the Cowboys have been I think, pleasantly surprised by his ability to stop the run, to crash the line of scrimmage a little bit, and give them something a little bit different in that position than they were expecting. So, here's a guy that, was fighting for a roster spot coming into training camp, and, I still don't know if he quite makes the team. A lot of it's going to depend upon how things shake out on the outside, specifically at defensive end, because Ben Bass was the guy they were, earmarking to be Jason Hatcher's primary backup, and now he may be outside. So that may open up a position for Nick Hayden to be a primary backup on this team, whereas a week ago I wasn't even sure he would make the team.
Amazing stuff. All right, now the guys that if you own stock in these guys, you may want to consider selling it now, taking your loss and getting out. You have, first of all, guard Mackenzie Bernadotte, who has done nothing in camp because he's not been able to practice.
Yeah, this bears watching, because this is the second straight year that Bernadotte has been hurt in the off season, or has had off season surgery to correct injuries that occurred during the previous season. Didn't really work out at all with the team during the off season. Hasn't gotten on the field at all thus far in training camp, which doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to make the team or anything like that. But what his absence has done, obviously, has given a chance to guys like Kevin Kowalski, David Arkin, some of the other guys that are sitting behind him on the depth chart to make a case to either be a backup or, even in the case of Leary, once he comes back, to be a starter. I don't think that anybody believes that Bernadotte is an above-average guard in the NFL. I mean, he did yeoman's work last year for this offensive line. He played center 2 games when they had nobody at the position, and he had never played the position before. So you have to tip your hat to him for that. But when you consider that the Cowboys are trying to improve what they're doing on the interior of the offensive line, they're trying to improve the running game, they're implementing phases of a new zone blocking scheme, all of those things are kind of conspiring against Bernadotte, because he can't work out, he can't show them what he can do, he can't show them whether or not he's grasping the new concepts they're introducing, and every day he's on the sideline as opposed to being on the field, it damages his ability to make the team or be a starter on this team, much less. So that's why his stock is dropping. Part of it he can't control, but part of it boils down to the fact that there's a lot of competition at that position, and at some point the Cowboys are going to have to make a decision as to whether or not they have the time to bring Bernadotte along when he's ready to take the field.
All right, you also list offensive tackle Jeremy Parnell, who split time toward the end of the year with Doug Free last year. He's hampered with injuries now as well in training camp. Talk about his situation.
Yeah, the Cowboys were really hopeful that he was going to take a step forward this offseason, and he's been kind of banged up, not to the point where he's missed all of the offseason, but he missed some of the offseason during OTAs and during minicamp, and now that he's in training camp, the Cowboys were very hopeful that he would be healthy enough to practice and compete with Doug Free, and it really hasn't been on a regular basis. He's been out the last few days with a hamstring injury. It sounds like he's going to be out for another week or two. That combined with Doug Free's improved play during practice the first week, I don't think that Parnell's roster spot is in danger, but I think certainly, him going into the season as a potential starter at that right tackle position, I think that's gone from like a 50-50 proposition to about an 80-20 proposition in favor of Doug Free.
Okay, another guy whose roster spot is not in danger, but a guy that the Cowboys absolutely are counting on to have a big year, and right now is just underwent knee surgery, is Anthony Spencer, the defensive end.
The thing that concerns me about this is that he's going to miss about a month, which means he's going to be well into late August before he's really ready to come back, and I could see the Cowboys being in a situation where they don't rush him back, where they basically just shut him down until the regular season begins. And you see that happen with veterans frequently in the NFL because, they typically know the system, they know how to stay in shape, and typically they can step right in that first day and be ready to go. The two things that hamper Spencer in this case is A, the switch from the 3-4 to the 4-3, and two, the fact that he's not really considered a, hand on the ground I'm going to rush the passer 99% of the time. That's DeMarcus Ware's job on the right side. That's what the right defensive end does in most 4-3 defenses. The left defensive end has to be a little bit more responsible for stopping the run. And given the fact that, Spencer's in that 260, 270 range, that's going to mean a little more wear and tear on him during a game. It's going to put him in a situation where he could potentially get a little bit more banged up with that knee. It's just a concerning situation when you consider the knee. It could be unstable all year depending on how well the surgery goes and how well his rehab goes. A lot of question marks surrounding him in terms of not necessarily making the team, but how high a quality will his play be when he comes back, especially given the amount of money the Cowboys are paying him this year to play that left defensive end spot.
All right, next guy on the list is a guy you don't know a whole lot about, and if there is a strength on this Cowboys team right now, it's at linebacker Devontae Holloman.
Yeah, this is the 6th-round pick out of South Carolina, and, I'll ask you a question. Have you heard anything about him during camp this week?
Zero, nothing.
And that's the problem. When you're a rookie, you can't go a week without being heard in the media or heard by coaches. I haven't heard coaches talk about him. I haven't heard players talk about him. By all accounts, Holloway did a pretty good job of grasping things during OTAs and minicamp. But he's really been overtaken by several of the other younger players in this unit, including Brandon McGee and other guys that were left over from last year that were young and had an opportunity to play in the 3-4 and are now trying to find a way to find a role in the 4-3 like Alex Albright. You don't want to go very long in training camp as a rookie and not be heard by the coaching staff. And I haven't heard a thing about Holloman this week. So his stock goes down just by the sheer fact that there's a lot of competition at that linebacker position, and he's not getting pointed out by the coaching staff from what I can tell.
No, I haven't heard his word at all. Witness protection program comes to mind.
I'm sorry?
I said witness protection program comes to mind.
Yes, it does. Right now he is in the rookie witness protection program.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Also, another guy whose stock's going down, according to your list, is guard Ryan Cook. I guess that's another one where he must be in the witness protection program because I've not seen his name anywhere.
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot about him either, and that's a guy that, of course, the Cowboys spent a draft pick on to get from Miami last year. I think it was a late-round pick, a 7th-round pick that they weren't able to take in this draft. He gives you position flexibility at guard and center, but you have Travis Frederick, the 1st-round pick. You have Phil Costa, whom I think is a darn near lead pipe lock to be the backup center, if not a starter at one of the guard positions. And that really puts Cook in a predicament because unless he can, worm his way into the competition at guard, I don't think he makes the team. And so far this week, I haven't heard very little about him. All the talk has been about the injured guards, guys like David Arkin and Kevin Kowalski. So the job for him going into the next week of camp is to start getting some chatter out there, based on his play in the field, obviously. But he needs coaches and he needs other players to start chattering about him a little bit to get his profile raised if he expects to make this football team coming out of training camp.
Well, that takes care of your stock watch list, but when you talk about people getting chatter, the guy that's getting all the talk is Des Bryant right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, he's this tells you everything you need to know about Des Bryant right now. Jason Garrett was talking about Bryant's play during practice, I think, on Wednesday. And there were a couple of plays where he beat both Brandon Carr and Morris Claiborne on separate plays. And Garrett basically said, you know what? Carr and Claiborne both defended him as well as they could have possibly done until the ball got there. And then Bryant's talent just took over. And, I mean, he's got those big arms. He's got that big body. He's tall. He can just reach over guys and grab the football and take it away from them. And that's what he did to Carr and Claiborne. So, we knew Bryant was having a very good off season, and now that seems to have carried over into training camp to the point where he kind of looks like a beast right now, and somebody that I'm not sure any opposing cornerback wants to deal with in the NFL this season.
Well, I can tell you from being at training camp last year, it was the same thing then. I mean, he looked like the biggest, baddest guy on the field last year, and then not such a great season until maybe the second half, where he started to really pick it up and dominate. Maybe this time, looking like a beast in training camp, he's ready to go and put it together for the whole year.
Yeah, he had all that stuff off the field last year, and I wonder if that played a factor. Even though he did have a great camp last year, you're right, it took him 6 or 7 games to get going. I think part of that may have just been the distraction of everything that happened on the field. He was banged up a little bit. His time was also divided. Remember, he was returning punts for the first several games of the year, and one of the reasons that he was pulled from returning punts was because of the mistakes that he made against Carolina and against the Giants. And I don't know if it's coincidental that his play at wide receiver started taking a massive uptick once the Cowboys removed him from that position, because he was no longer dividing his time. So you have a guy who's coming off a huge second half, who's had a huge offseason, who now has his time completely focused on being a wide receiver in an offense that, frankly, is tailor-made to get the ball down the field to him. He could have an enormous year this year. There's no denying that's a possibility.
Well, it's going to be interesting, and believe it or not, a week from this Saturday, I guess, is the Hall of Fame game, and it's time for preseason football.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and the blue and silver scrimmage coming up this weekend out in Oxnard. So, along with the fact that the players have been in pads for the last few days, you're going to get your first real taste of game action, And usually the Cowboys will scrimmage and a team out there in California, they'll get to San Diego or they'll get to Oakland and scrimmage one of those guys. But because all of the other teams are a week behind the Cowboys right now, they don't have anybody to scrimmage, so they've got to scrimmage themselves. So the two things you want to see if you're the Cowboys is, number one, you obviously want to see some of these guys in a real game situation, whether they can handle things or find out what they need to work on. And also you want to make sure you don't hurt anybody else. I mean, they've got some they don't have serious injuries as far as season enders. Tyrone Crawford's the only one, but they've got a lot of nagging injuries, and they don't need any more at this point.
No. Let's stop that right now, okay?
Yep,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Running out of bandages.
Yeah, when you think about it, it's a 90-man roster. They can't bring anybody in without dropping somebody. They can't put anybody on IR at this point. They can't do that till after the 4th preseason game, and they've got about 10 or 15 guys that aren't seeing time right now due to injuries. So in reality, they've got a 90-man roster, but in reality, they've got about 75 guys that are practicing right now. So they're, for a training camp situation where everybody's competing every day, they're a little bit thin.
All right, very good. Hey, Matthew, great stuff. We will check back with you in a few days as we continue to watch the Cowboys in training camp, and we'll get another stock watch from you, and also whatever else develops, we'll be checking with you to make sure we get it on Rattle and Hump Sports.
All right. Thanks, Bryan.
Sounds great. Matthew Postins covering the Dallas Cowboys for Rattle and Hump Sports. I'm Bryan Houston. This is a Rattle and Hump Sports podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.